Is it immoral to buy Chinese stocks? This is such a fascinating question. I really wanted to explore today from a business perspective, political perspective, and obviously philosophical perspective. If you don't know by now, I am a little bit more philosophical than I am anything else. And I really like interrogating and answer these questions. For investors, I think this is a fundamentally important question to answer and to ask yourself and to interrogate to understand your own investment perspective on if you feel there is a meaningful relationship between morality and ethics in the context of China. Now, why is this question so relevant right now? Well, there's a couple of things that are going on. There's some political turmoil going on internally in China in terms of how the Chinese government is treating a lot of the Chinese citizens, particularly some of the things that the Chinese government has been alleged to be doing with Muslims and Uyghurs in China. It is questioning the authority of how China is morally acting within its own country in terms of human rights abuses. The second thing that is going on is Chinese companies are being delisted from the New York Stock Exchange, i.e. D Global, and Chinese companies are being sort of reined in by the Chinese government, because it's very important to understand that the Chinese government is called the CCP for a reason. They're the China Communist Party. They are not a normal average democracy that people in the West may be used towards. And because they are not the average democracy, their government has a strong control over everything companies do, because it's not like companies are free to do things and there's a constitution and there's like freedoms and there's certain regulations, certain not. They have full control over everything, and if they want to get rid of you, they can get rid of you in an instant. And by the way, if you refuse, they bring guns to your head, because that's how the government works. It has a monopoly on violence. On top of that, Charlie Munger, who is a very known investment person in the investment community, obviously the vice president of Berkshire Hathaway, just doubled his stake to about $72 million in Alibaba Group, about 602,000 shares, up from when he had 300,000, which was just released a day ago. So when we're talking about is it moral or not to invest in Chinese stocks, you have someone who really doesn't care and thinks Alibaba, which is one of China's I think it is China's biggest companies, has a lot of potential. It is grossly undervalued. It was at a high of $309 in October of 2020, and today it's at like 123. There is a lot of potential for it to grow, and he's doubling down on his stake. So in this video, we're going to talk about a lot of the different perspectives between if it's immoral to invest in Chinese stocks, why it may be, why it may not be, and ultimately what Charlie Munger thinks about the situation and why he's continuing to pour money deep into one of the biggest tech stocks in China. The first thing to understand about the Chinese economy is that it's very complex. And in the 1970s or up until around 1982, it was not a strong economy at all. It was very bad. People were poor. There wasn't enough food. There wasn't enough production. There wasn't enough energy. They always had to rely on other partners. China was not a self-sustaining economy at all. This was not until Deng Xiaoping, who became the leader of China after the death of Mao Zedong in 1976, changed everything. Basically, this guy met up with the prime minister in Singapore. They saw all the stuff Singapore was doing. They had energy, they had factories, they had oil and gas, they had like all this internal stuff going on in the company. And he was like, you guys are pretty much doing everything on your own, and you don't need any help from a lot of other countries, and you guys are pretty self-sustaining. And you did this not by taxing the crap out of rich people, but you let economic and market conditions dictate the amount of supply and demand that exists for every sector in the global economy, or at least in Singapore's economy, and you put average people to work. And Deng Xiaoping was just like, we should probably do that. And through coordination with Jimmy Carter and a lot of other different forces in the West, he really started to understand, okay, if we let the market go wild, meaning we let people start their own businesses, we let people create new ideas, we let people launch new products, we can use what the West has sort of engineered and pioneered, which is this global economic infrastructure of capitalism, apply it via Chinese principles and doctrines, and still be able to get the best out of our original ideals, which are these common prosperity for all philosophies, and this idea of communism being this overall social good, with the market conditions to be able to actually increase the ability for our economy to get bigger. This changed everything. By 2014, China was the largest economy in the world. You had about 30 years of just letting people do whatever they wanted, letting capitalism run free, letting the free market be the free market. and China took about 600 million people out of poverty. I mean, it was one of the most amazing transformations of all time, and it is something that has been well documented in history for why capitalism is a good thing for human progress. Now, even though they let people do capitalism and do their own thing, the problem was the government didn't just let them only do their own thing. The Chinese government eventually started realizing, okay, the West is getting the West has engineered the system of capitalism, and we have been using it, but now these tech companies are getting too powerful. Now people think they can really do whatever they want. And the nature of an authoritarian regime, which is pretty much what China is, given it doesn't have free voting and democracy and a lot of that stuff, and there's not really like true freedom of speech, is that they are going to rein in when the regime doesn't feel like their authority is being respected, which is why we saw Jack Ma, which is the president or founder of Alibaba Group, back in 2020 disappear after he went to a conference and said some like disparaging remarks about the Chinese government. It wasn't even that bad. Like the stuff people say in America is like a trillion times worse. I think he just said some controversial comments about some regulations they passed, and he was gone for about a couple months. If Jeff Bezos had said some controversial statements about the government and he disappeared for a couple months, financial media would go insane. Every single day, they would be questioning, where's Jeff Bezos? Where's Jeff? He's the CEO of one of the biggest public traded companies in the world. There's no way that he can just go out of the public light like that. It's a public company. You got to be a public person, especially because you have billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars of people's money at stake. We're talking about not just, institutions. We're talking about pension funds and all these like 401ks. These are average people that are invested through these institutions in these funds. And if you as a public official are gone, the trust in the company reduces, which means the stock price reduces, which means a lot of people are affected. When you are the CEO of a public company, it really matters. And so for Jack Ma to leave for those couple months, it really shook a lot of people in the West because they saw that China was having a lot of power. Additionally, Jack Ma's Ant Financial Group was supposedly going to be the largest IPO in history. And because, the Chinese government really thought that company was going to have too much power, they thought that Jack Ma was sort of getting ahead of himself a little bit and feeling like he was the big dog. They reined it in and they stopped it from happening. It was supposed to happen, I think, in October, November 2020, and it hasn't happened yet. They're still trying to figure out how they can get it done because the Chinese government said, nah, we're putting an end to this. So the point here to understand is that even though the Chinese government used capitalism and Western values of a free market enterprise to build up the economic mobility of so many millions of people in China, and China is one of the world's largest populations, about 1.3, 1.4 billion people, they also have this overhead that doesn't let it get too big from a socio-cultural perspective to be able to make sure their values of common prosperity are always maintained, leading some people to believe that there is a world in which China gets rid of a capitalist system, not fully, but really reins it back because they only used it to let the world prosper, or to let China prosper, to let average people get some type of economic mobility. But now that it's gotten to such a big extent, they don't need it to go rampant like we have throughout the rest of the world, where there's just extreme wealth inequality. At that point, they're like, well, we used it, we got a lot of people out of poverty, but now we should focus more on common prosperity. So this brings up a very interesting question. If all this internal turmoil is going on in China, literally one of the main Chinese companies, DD Global Group, had to resign from the New York Stock Exchange because China did not want it to be on the stock exchange anymore. Chinese stocks are getting hammered because of the internal problems within the government, and them literally, chopping off the CEOs' heads in terms of making them step down and making them disappear from the public. Why is Charlie Munger doubling down his investment into China? Take a look at this clip. I'll be back in a minute.
Well, I don't think I've got deep knowledge on exactly what works well in the internal politics of every other country. Who would have guessed that the Chinese communists would improve their big country as much as they have in the last 30 years?
That surprised you?
Well, they didn't. The first 20 years, they had the Cultural Revolution. It was crazy. And now they have one of the greatest success records in the history of mankind. I don't know about you, but I did not predict it.
I didn't. But what? So what is the secret to China's success then?
They copied Singapore.
Which
and
is?
Remember, the communist leader said, I don't care if the cat is black or white, I care whether it catches mice. And they copied a very wonderful, famous Chinese man in Singapore. And lo and behold, they found the right Chinese leadership outside of China, which amuses me. Now, he was Chinese, but look at the way it worked. In the whole history of the world, no nation that big has ever advanced that fast. And they did it by having a bunch of poor people save half their income. They did not use the wealth of the rich world to get ahead. They used the savings of poor people. I am a huge admirer of what the Chinese have accomplished.
So this brings up the final question that we have to answer. Is it immoral to invest in Chinese stocks, given everything that's going on, the problems within the Chinese government in terms of how they're treating other people, and the actual sort of dictatorial regimes of like stopping people from doing what they want and stopping CEOs from being public, all that stuff? Is it still philosophically moral to invest in Chinese companies? Here's my answer. I'm looking forward to see what other people say in the comments. Yes, it is absolutely moral to invest in Chinese companies. I think anyone who says it's immoral is like making a very weird philosophical argument. Now, my counter argument is that it's a bad business decision in some scenarios, right? From a business perspective, you might not want to invest in China because there's different forces that are operating, which means you don't know if Alibaba gets delisted. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. We'll talk about that in a second. But from a business perspective, it may be a little bit harder. From a moral perspective, I don't think it's immoral. Now, here are the couple of reasons I don't think it's immoral. At the end of the day, business and ethics is incredibly complicated. And when you're investing in a business, a lot of times you're detaching it from all the ethical consequences that exist. If you don't do that, you really can't be an investor. The reason for this is because businesses oftentimes have to do some unethical things, or at least there are objectively unethical things applied within the business, even if the business is not intending to do unethical things. So, imagine how many people have done unethical things. Like, I say that very broadly because it's meant to be broad, using their iPhone. Right? People have probably planned stuff using their iPhone. They have probably robbed people, planning up where to meet people. Like, they've probably done a lot of things using that iPhone, but we can't blame Apple for that because philosophically we have to recognize that Apple just provides the product. They've done a good service in giving people a catalyst to enhance and improve their lives. And then people have their own free will to be able to do something with that iPhone at the end of the day. And if they choose to do something wrong with that, if we were to blame Apple for that, we would not be able to survive as a society because this is the nature of individualistic beliefs. Like, at the end of the day, people have to be responsible for themselves. Are there collective assumptions? Are there collective problems? If China's polluting a lot in the environment to make those iPhones, should we hold them accountable and should we make them change? Absolutely. But holding them responsible for all the problems that exist via their product as an ethical issue, I think is not the strongest thing to do. So when I say investing in China is not immoral, if you're investing in Chinese companies, at the end of the day, they are separated from their government. Like Alibaba Group, and there are probably some like unethical things Alibaba Group has done, which I'm sure every company is akin to and holds blame for. But at the end of the day, they're just trying to make a business, right? They're just trying to provide jobs for people. They're trying to provide opportunities. They have so many subsidiaries in terms of commerce and Alipay, and they have this Ali Hollywood basically starting up, right? Jack Ma's really excited for that, creating movies and media. It's going to have to be dictated by how the Chinese government feels about that movies and media. But at the end of the day, they have so many different services that they're offering to the 1.3 billion people in China and the other 6 billion people across the world that they're just trying to operate as a business. And if the government is doing some things that are unethical, immoral, so from the Western perspective, they're not allowing freedom of speech. That's immoral to us. They may be, not allowing freedom of religion because in China, you really can't be religious. That's immoral to us. All of those individualistic values that we feel that the Chinese government is not upholding, to me, have no impact in terms of the investment decision that you're making within Chinese companies. Because an investment decision is I give you $1, I want $2 back. And I just need to feel good at night about how I get those $2 back. But just because I'm giving you $1 and you're in this country that has these sort of dictatorial regimes and values doesn't mean that that $1 to you is unethical. Additionally, from a utilitarian perspective, investing in Chinese stocks is actually helping the economy a lot. Like utilitarianism is the branch of philosophy that says we should aim to give the greater good for the greater amount of people. So if I do something, it should aim to help society writ large. When you're investing in companies, you're giving more money to those companies, which means they have more power to operate and go through their operations. So in the context of China, if you're giving money to Alibaba Group or Neo or whatever, obviously you want to see a return, but you are making those companies more valuable, more powerful, and that in turn is helping Chinese citizens create more products and services, have more goods, have just a better, more efficient, effective, productive life. So there's a very strong utilitarian argument that if you were to invest in Chinese stocks, you are theoretically helping, right, people who live in China because those companies play a major role in their lives. So it's just funny to me when I go on Twitter and I see like these investment managers say like, screw China, I'll never invest in China. It's like, you realize all of your operations and your supply chains for every American company you invest in are coming from China, right? You realize like all these companies do business with China, because you can't ignore China. That's the conundrum and the paradox that exists within the 21st century. And let's see if it gets solved in the 22nd century. I won't be here. You guys probably won't be here either, but we're gonna, it's gonna have to get resolved eventually, right? Which is like, America has different values. The West has different values than China, but China's so big, and they've, stolen, I say that in a good way, a lot of those Western values in terms of capitalism to implement within their regime, but they haven't implemented the socio-cultural values, which are kind of go hand in hand. You can't just say free market and then say no freedom of speech, because the whole idea is freedom should be central to the core of a governing society. And when you have this conundrum of like authoritarian values with free market, it creates this weird paradox. And the rest of the world is like, how are we supposed to deal with this, right? Because like this is not what we want to deal with, but we kind of have to, because you're supplying the world's goods and services. You're supplying most of our food, most of our rice, most of our grains. It's incredibly complicated, and it's something that needs to be understood in a more meaningful way, which is exactly what I think Munger was talking about in that previous clip. He's saying, look, the Chinese economy is booming. They were the first people to really get they were the first to recognize what Western values could do in a country that was governed by dictatorial regimes and socialist regimes, and a lot of other countries around the world didn't get it. They acted upon that, and they blew up the country, which is why he feels very ethical and comfortable investing in that country, because he knows there's going to be a big return, and he knows this country is going to do really good things. He's not thinking of it from a perspective of, oh, I'm investing in China, therefore I'm giving the Chinese government more power, because if these Chinese companies become more powerful, intrinsically the government is going to become more powerful given they're a communist regime. He's thinking it from two perspectives. Number one, I'm making a return on my money, which is the nature of how investing works. And number two, I am detaching my ethical concerns with the government, if I have any, with the investment I'm making in a business, because at the end of the day, I have to let that business operate. And if there's good fundamentals to the business, it is separated from the government. And I'm just hoping for the best that the government's not going to shut down the business, and I'm going to make a return on my money with the business, which is why I think it is a hard decision financially to justify given the current political climate. That's why I'm very hesitant to invest in China. But morally, it's really hard for me to believe that philosophically people don't want to invest in China for these like reasons. So those are my thoughts on the situation. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Is it good to invest in China? Do you feel it's bad? Do you feel philosophically it's bad? Do you feel business-wise it's bad? Looking forward to reading the comments. My name is Mitt. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.